No, it's something that I had to think about, and a lot of my early stories when I was first starting writing was it's just bizarre circumstances, and part of that is because I read so many comic books, and in comic books, Spider-Man lives in New York City. It's a real place. It's a real world. It just so happens that he has superpowers, and so you just accept it in the first panel. And I was like, oh, that's really cool that you can create this bizarre thing, and it's accepted as real. And so when I started writing fiction, that's what I did. And what I learned was the stories fell apart if it was just the bizarre circumstance, and that what you had to do was you had to hook your reader early with that strangeness, and that would get them on board. But then you had to earn that by making the characters or the situation something that would resonate with them after the initial fun of that weird conceit wore off. And it always wears off, that you can't sustain the reader just on strangeness. There has to be something underneath that to hold them, to resonate after the story's over. And so it was trial and error. It was writing stories. I was like, why are these stories falling apart? And it was because there wasn't anything underneath that initial strangeness. And so that was a really hard thing to figure out. And then once I figured it out, it's still very hard to make it work in the fiction. Like you immediately set yourself up at this weird disadvantage when you have magic or weirdness in your story. You have to earn it. And I think a lot of bad writing doesn't earn that weirdness, so I'm just constantly terrified that that's what's going to happen with each story. No, I have a bunch of stories that aren't published or that weren't in the collection, but thematically they don't sync up in a way that I feel like I have a collection yet. And I spent so much time on this novel that I haven't really had enough time to work on short stories again in a way that I feel like there's some larger thing that I'm getting at in all of the stories. They're very disparate and not connected yet. And the more I write stories, the more something starts to trickle into the work over a larger portion of the stuff I'm creating. So I hope to get back to that, but it was just impossible working with a deadline for the novel to kind of think about short stories. It felt like I was cheating on the novel, and I had a deadline in advance that they'd already paid me that I would have to give back if I didn't finish the novel. So there was no reason to write short stories for a while, but I hope to get back into them. It's rare that I come up with an entire narrative or an idea. It's just some strange random event. So there's a story in the collection called Blowing Up on the Spot, which is the earliest story in the collection, and I had just this image in my head that I couldn't get out of my head of these Scrabble tiles just falling from the sky. And that was it. It was just like the world was raining Scrabble tiles. And I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it, and I was like, what is that, and why does that matter? Why do I care about this? And so then what I do in my head is I try to construct a narrative to make that image important, and then you just keep working out from that. So I was like, okay, why are they falling from the sky? And then in my head I was like, okay, they're not falling from the sky, it's falling from a chute in a factory. And I was like, why are they falling from a chute in a factory? And I was like, okay, there's somebody catching them. And so then you go from that, and you just build outward and outward and outward from that original image. And sometimes what I find is that original image or line disappears from the story once the narrative takes control, but I need that initial spark to get going. So like with The Shooting Man, I constantly kept thinking of just, there was a dude who shot himself in the face but wouldn't die. And I was like, okay, but that's an interesting conceit or image, but what is that? And I was like, okay, is the story the guy? And I was like, no, okay, it'll be people going to see the guy. Why are they going to see him? He's in a carnival size, and so you just keep building it from that. But I can never think in terms of A to B. I can't think of like, there is a man and something is wrong, and then how do we get him to the end where he triumphs? I just can't think like that. It doesn't work. The stories always suck. So I just keep myself open to these strange images or ideas and just wait until I can figure out narratives to construct around them. I'm reading constantly. and I switch back and forth. I read this wide range. Like I read comic books constantly. I spend like $100 a month on comic books, money that we don't have. So I read comic books every month. And then I read these old pulp novels from the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. These weird kind of crime novels and stuff that I just have always loved. So I read those. And then I read like modern thrillers. Just what people would call garbage, but I think is great. I love it. I love reading, you know, these novels about spies and stuff. And then I read what people call serious literature, and I'm reading that constantly. And I read YA stuff. I read anything. And you know, I have favorites that I go back to and read. But like right now, I'm reading this guy Chris Adrian, who I've read his other 3 books, and it's just this strange, bizarre story where it's Midsummer Night's Dream set in a park in San Francisco, and weird stuff is happening, and it's really incredible and beautiful, and I'm loving reading it. And at the same time, I'm reading all this other stuff. I constantly have like 3 or 4 books at any given time that I'm invested in. But yeah, I love it, and to not read would be so bizarre to me. I just can't stop. There's always a new book that comes out that I feel like I have to read, or I won't be a happy person. Yeah, I read mostly Marvel, because I grew up reading Marvel, because my cousins who are older than me read Marvel. So I read X-Men and Iron Man, all the X-Men stories, so I read all of those. And then now I read mostly Marvel with Batman. I read like 3 of the Batman titles, and I read lots of Vertigo and Image, stuff like that. But I have never read a bad comic book. I will read any comic book. It really is just budget-wise that I can't read them all, because I would. There's nothing that I don't like about the form. When I was a kid, it was the most incredible thing to read about superheroes, and as an adult, I feel like the depth of the comic books have become such that I understand that there's more going on, but I still can't get over that initial fascination with just the bizarreness of comic books and the art. I just love looking at sequential art. I think it's a really interesting form. Yeah. I would like to write comic books. I mean, that would be a dream job. More than a serious literary novelist, I would like to write comic books, you know, and those characters that I've known since I was like 7 and 8 years old, to still constantly be thinking about them is really incredible. No, God no, because sleep, my wife and I keep a running tally of the things, not the people, but the things that I love most in the world. And number 1 is always sleep. Sleep is the most incredible thing to me. I would sleep for 18 hours a day if I could. There is nothing that I don't like about it. The sleep provides separation between me and the rest of the world. I wouldn't give that up for anything. And I have so many like Batman statues and little minifigures and comic books that I would never want to give those up. If I could, I'd take a pill that would allow me to sleep for 18 hours and yet still have time to do everything else.
I think you could find something.
No, I'd need the day to be expanded. I'd need the day to be like 48 hours long, and I could sleep for 18. It was socially acceptable to sleep for 18. Then I would do that in a second. Oh no, I mean, no. I think showers are like 4th or 5th on the list of things that I love the most in this world. Yeah, I don't think I could do that. The money wouldn't be worth it. I have so much anxiety in existing in the world of being around people that if I had to add to the fact that I stank and looked awful, that would just amp up the level of anxiety. And if I couldn't tell people why, I would be terrified all the time. I would never leave my house. It wouldn't be worth the money to me.